make it. I was a little bit earlier this week, and thank you for sharing some story ideas during the week. Good to see you as well. Sergeant Bilko, I also see we have Mr. Cordy Chap talking about people in Australia fighting over toilet paper. Yeah, people are being very silly about that, as you'll see by the title of this video, which is probably going to result in me losing billions and trillions of dollars on this video. That for YouTube, one of the topics I'll cover tonight, in its infinite wisdom, has decided to demonetize videos about coronavirus, which is funny because, you know, if you actually take the creator playbook or whatever, they actually go through how to, track trending topics and talk about the news. They want people to have discussions online, but I guess I do understand there is a lot of toxic and really not great content online about coronavirus, people with fake cures and whatnot, and they want to police that. And that kind of makes sense to me, but at the same time, the idea of just demonetizing content about coronavirus, I mean, when it's like the only thing, I mean, I wish that they would demonetize coronavirus content on the news so that I could watch something else for a change. I'm kind of tired of it, actually, as a subject. I've actually found myself drawn towards enjoying American politics lately, just because it's something different. But anyway, that's me. Great to see everybody rolling in. Let me see who else is here in the comments. We've got Andrew Mulboy, Sergeant Bilko, Mr. Cordy Chep, I already said, as well as Quentin Rankin. Boom, good to see you. We've got Tokyo 503. Good evening, James Kelly. Boom, right back at you, the J Vlog. Salutations. And Andrew Mulboy has 30 rolls in your house, but you bought the pack 3 weeks ago. So there we go. You were just keeping stock, which is exactly good for... you know, it's kind of funny. I mean, how can Australians be fighting over toilet paper? They didn't fight about toilet paper like when they were surrounded by poisonous animals. They didn't fight about toilet paper during floods. They didn't during the heat wave. They didn't during the bushfires. And you know, I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what the connection is with buying this. I understand it feels like a rush on the banks. It's like people are afraid, hey, if I don't get some, everyone else is going to get all the toilet paper and I'll be without toilet paper. My first advice that I actually gave on Twitter today to people in Australia is, if you're worried about running out of toilet paper, well, first thing is, do yourself a favor, get a fucking washlet. You know, join the 20th century. Join 50 years ago in Japan. Get a toilet that washes your bum, can even half dry it for you. I mean, all you need the paper for in that case, pretty much. You only need to wipe it once or twice and you're good. You know, this is the thing. Whenever I go back to Australia, I use half a roll every time I'm there because you're never quite fully clean, you know. In fact, I actually got to the point where at least a lot of Australian bathrooms, sorry, without wanting to be too graphic, but I will anyway, a lot of bathrooms, you know, you've got the sink, the toilet sort of is right beside where the sink and everything is, and I would actually wet the toilet paper because that's what I'm used to, like where it's wet, and when you wipe with like that, you know, you wash your hands after, but basically you can actually get clean. And you know, everyone is basically, I remember my great aunt, she used to talk about how she never understood how toilet paper ever took off because everyone could just use newspaper for free, which is what people used to do. And actually with newspaper, the print, it's black, you know, but it's actually got sort of foil in it. It actually wasn't bad. This is what people used to do. They were never clean. But the fact that half of Australia is going around with toilet shortages, and not just Australia, of course, New Zealand, America, everywhere else that doesn't have these, you know, doesn't use the 3 shells yet. Yeah, it's like, you got to even use half a roll. You can still end up with skid marks. You can still end up having a nightmare on toilets if you have hemorrhoids or constipation. And washlets like help with all of these things. They don't fix them, they don't cure them, but they pretty much do it. And you don't need as much toilet paper. So I have not bought any toilet paper since the stupid panics here started over that. One, because we've got stock, but two, because we're in a country that honestly, whenever I go to Australia or New Zealand, I hate to say it, but it feels like using, you know, like what I imagine it must have been for my parents when they had to go to houses that still use long drops and outdoor holes in the ground toilets, you know, which still existed apparently in the 50s and 40s in remote parts of Australia. So yeah, Quentin Rankin, you know what, I actually wonder about that. So how did that used to work when they were using newspaper? I guess that they used to put it in a bucket or something, or a rubbish bin beside the toilet. I know, let's face it, no one wants to think too much about what toilets were like before 1950. But that's what they used to do. And of course, so we had this luxurious time of toilet paper, but again, you're still, you know, In any case, please, everyone, Australia, if you're worried about secure your supply, not that there should be any reason for a shortage anyway. I mean, this really doesn't have anything to do with the symptoms of COVID-19. But if you're worried about running out of toilet paper ever somehow, buy washlets for the whole country. Seriously, or get washlets for yourself. Do yourself a favor. Seriously. It took me like 5 or 6 years being in Japan before I got one, but now I cannot live without them. I mean, they are just it is serious shit. I mean, and I can say that because it's actually literally true in this case. Also, what's a newspaper? Crit Red, get excellent point. Also, what's a newspaper? I guess at this point, people are maybe going to be using their iPads, which probably raises new problems. So, yeah, that's an excellent point. I hadn't considered that. Andrew Mobo, in South Korea, you didn't flush loo paper, had loo paper bin. Well, okay, I didn't realize that, but perhaps that's how it used to work. That's the only way I assume it could have worked with newspaper. And again, after World War II in Japan, I'm sure it was the same in Japan and Korea, actually, right after World War II. There, apart from the fact that most places did not actually have connected sewerage, and had either septic tanks or long drops or whatever in Japan. Yeah, I remember when I was in Fukuoka in high school at an exchange, and the priest who was like running the school, that it's like a missionary sort of private school in Fukuoka that I exchanged with Taisei Gakuen. And he was saying that when he came in the 1950s to Japan, people were still using human excrement for farming, which was what people used to use for fertilizer until there were sort of modern fertilizers, which really didn't start in Japan until the 50s and 60s. So it's a thing. I realize this is a little bit heavy to be going into right away, but thank you, Mr. Kordychev, for the topic suggestion. I also see that in the comments we have Barry Bonds, good to see you. Tai Nakamura, good to see you, sir. Who else we got in here? I see more people rolling in. Tech Out 2, hello indeed, good to see you. And everybody else. Remember, as always, if you want to grab my attention, at Mark Hiko Simon, and it will flash an orange so I can see media to blame. Hiko Simon, I believe you. Says Andrea Moboy. In fact, all the comments to me, Andrea Moboy, to do the plumbing here and cannot take the loo paper. Well, there you go, the plumbing in South Korea. And actually in buildings here as well, like for example in Japan, even flushing tissues, for example. I mean, there's also bad form everywhere. That stuff actually becomes, jams up the sewers and whatnot. But yes. Indeed, we can tell puns. But what a time to be alive. So anyway, let's get into the topics that we have. This is going, of course, from the start of the week through this week. This one I like. It's probably a sign of progress, perhaps, that this was the joke. The debate about gay marriage, when people were not even asking the question, okay, even if we can let them marry, but should they be allowed to divorce? It's kind of like people celebrating, hey Shivas, I'm so relieved, thank you. I was afraid that you weren't going to make it. Glad that you made it. Thank you, Shivas. Buenos dias in Panama. I guess it's early in the morning. Always good to have you along with us. Mucho gusto. So yes, Japan in a landmark ruling, although marriage is spreading throughout Japan, of course. Recognized civil weddings at city council offices. Japan actually has this funny thing. If you are married and you have an affair, Japan still uses the same sort of system that we used to have in common law countries in New Zealand, Australia, America, Canada, yada yada, those sort of countries. It used to be actually, not until not that long ago, 60s or 70s, you could actually, if somebody slept with your wife, you could actually sue them for compensation, and this was something that had happened for more time. Except the way that what you would sue them for was for conversion of a chattel, i.e., they were messing with your property. You would actually sue them for, and although even when it became probably in the late 1960s, I don't know when people stopped looking at women as the property of men. But even when it became recognized that, okay, women are really not the property of men anymore, and they still recognize, well, but yeah, we should be able to sue people if they steal my car or sleep with my wife, and they still use that same principle that you could go sue people if they did that. Up until like the 1980s, before they really had these adultery lawsuits really sort of disappear more or less in common law countries. Japan, I don't think they use the same idea of wife as property. In fact, the lawsuit thing can be either way. The woman can sue the man can sue the woman for adultery, and it's actually a recognized cause under the civil code, and it's not even going to be kicked out of the civil code update from what I understand. However, an interesting case here, of course, that same-sex, when the law is increasingly recognizing same-sex couples for the first time ever, court case in Tochigi, it looks like, has recognized compensation, being able to sue the other person for sleeping with your spouse. So progress, I suppose. It's not treated in Japan. It is not the same as it was in New Zealand and Australia as conversion as a chattel, which is kind of ridiculous. Although at the same time, when they got rid of that idea because it looked a little bit too much like enslavement of women, they just did away with the whole idea of being able to sue people for infidelity anyway. Japan has kind of kept a middle ground, and I suppose this is equality with great. Well, you wouldn't say power, would you? But you would say certainly with equal rights comes equal responsibilities and things to watch out for. But that was kind of interesting anyway. Another story. So the Tokyo government has asked citizens to refrain from outdoor hanami parties. You can go walk in the park. They're not closing the parks. You can go look at the hanami, but near my house, the sort of annual festival, the organised festivals of hanami run by governments have all been closed. You can look at the cherry blossoms. They are out there, but what they don't want is groups of people sitting together for prolonged periods of time drinking. The Tokyo government has requested pretty much that everyone cancel their planned hanami party plans. They're not being more forceful about it right now. There are already cherry blossoms out in Tokyo. There are some forms of cherry blossoms that come out early. Of course, there are the plum blossoms that come out like in February. And now you've got some of the early blossoming sakura, including one that I caught the other day on Instagram, which was very, very nice. But yes, really the next week or two, we'll get the full-on cherry blossoms. It's not recommended, like I say. The government doesn't have the authority to actually ban or prohibit them. It's up to the individual parks and the organisers, but certainly organised hanamis are being shut down. The ones, the big organised ones in Meguro, for example, and Ueno, those festivals have been cancelled. I still expect there'll be some people doing it, but there you go. In spite of that, I debated this with Zach. The YouTube hanami is not cancelled right now. It is still planning to go ahead. I'm not sure it's the smartest thing to do, and honestly, I'm not sure I'll be able to actually attend. I'm sure I'll be able to get a day pass for it, if just given the way that things are. Obviously, for people who understand the risk, and the risk is obviously known to everybody right now. That is a thing. I mean, this video doesn't allow us to talk about the reason for it, but that is a thing. In any case, I think what's obviously happened is, along with the shutting down of all the schools, which is something which has affected me as well, is that the governments have really, the Japanese government is really trying, on the one hand, you could say proactively that the government's trying to do what it can to minimize the chance of transmission and trying to hold everything down a little bit, encouraging people to work from home, shutting down the schools, having the kids stay at home, theoretically, in order to try to have a chance to stem the spread of this before it gets too close to the Olympics, where it might cause a problem. A cynic might say that this is a overkill being done because of the Olympics, but either way, I think it's the right thing to do. Hey, Travis Moore, good to see you. Also good to see Perk and Erin, and problem is, when I read this way, I always miss people out, but good to see you all. Remember, of course, at Makiko Simon, if you want to say hello, like for example, Andrea Mowbray says the Grand Prix is still on hold in the long weekend there in Melbourne. Well, that's interesting. I guess they have to think of how you could get coronavirus from a car, but I suppose there are lots of people who watch, so that would be the problem, wouldn't it? And indeed, I see lots of toilet paper emojis going on there, but that is ridiculous and stupid. But look, hanami stuff, as with everywhere, people are being discouraged right now from going to gyms, to going to school, from avoiding work as much as possible, avoiding crowded trains. It's not like China. It's not like they can actually lock people inside their buildings like they were able to do, and restrict the number of times people are going out of their building once a week and ID them when they do. Japan cannot and will never be able, I hope never becomes able to do that. But at the same time, one, there's a tax on that there is always a large number of stupid people, which we're going to be talking about tonight, even though apparently we're not allowed to talk about the word that triggers that. The other downside of stuff like this, I think it's part of just social responsibility. This is something we should all be sort of sacrificing a little bit for the sake of making sure I've heard people say, hey, only 2% of people die from this, and it's all old people, so, I'm not afraid, I'm just going to go out and do what I'm going to do. I get that, but, if you get it, even if you don't feel it that bad or whatever, you could give, well, apart from the fact that there are plenty of people in their 20s and 30s that have had serious cases, the fact that you could give it to people or pass it on to people who eventually give it to people who will die from it, that's actually self-centered and stupid and irresponsible. It's also very much the times, I suppose. But this is where I think everybody should be pulling back a little bit on these things. Anyway, that's the news. In terms of how we should be living, and I saw the future. I went straight on to order this. It turned out when this was on Gizmodo, this setup, apparently it's only available in single beds, understandably, although I'm down, They on Gizmodo they showed basically the perfect furniture. Saying this is about furniture. I said it was about furniture. Check this out. It's a Japanese company. Apparently they've got all sorts of computer sort of gaming oriented desks and work desks which culminate in this setup which can go around a bed like this with a very comfortable looking big pillow. And it was funny actually watching the people on the internet who the Japanese commenters on the internet when this went viral in Japan as well, commenting that yeah, but you get bed sores after a while. You need to be able to turn a little bit. People had obviously experimented and actually done their own mock-ups of this thoroughly. Again, this is the Wall-E future, I suppose, but given that we're all being told to telework, I've teleworked a couple of times. I like to be talking face-to-face and in the office, so at work, a big chunk of people at where I'm working are working from home. We're very lucky. Well, I work doing legal stuff, so I really can do pretty much everything remotely. It's more that, for example, when my kids are home and when there's noise and distractions and when I'm not, when it comes to 5:30, 6 p.m. And I still need to work, but there's lots of noise and stuff going on and, why isn't the house clean and stuff. I'd rather be at the office and not deal with any of that. But there again, if I was in a situation where I was, I could see a situation where spending pretty much my entire life like that, yeah, I would consider that. I think that's pretty awesome, actually. So, yeah, the setup is a Japanese company, and it is a gaming bed. So this company, what's it called again? It was like a Baufut. I mean, I guess it's a German word, but even the setup is not very expensive. Yeah, the full setup is like, what was it, $1,200 US? So pretty good. Anyway, that is the thing. That is the furniture aspect of the show. Again, apparently 60% of people who've been teleworking have been pointing out that, well, there's things where I still need to look at physical copies and use stamps and seals and stuff like that. Yes, and that's funny because that is something which actually happens with a lot of people. Where I've worked in legal departments in Japanese companies, yeah, everything was passed around as a physical copy, that everybody had their little personal stamp that they had to stamp. Yeah, I read this is approved by me. And also everyone would like superficially like mark it up and pass it along. So yeah, I do think this is where this whole deal at the moment is actually a fantastic opportunity for people to rethink. One, this idea about working through sickness, which is very much ingrained in the culture here. The fact that there are no sick days, so people, and people actually brag, "Oh, I'm so sick, but I need to get all my work done, and I'm just too busy, and I'm just such a responsible person that I need to stay here and do this." And people vocally like brag as they work, getting everybody around them sick. And and I used to work in Japanese companies where I remember there was an open plan office company where I worked once. And you'd see people catching a cold, and each day it would like come towards you across the open plan office, across the rows of desks, like a wave. You could actually like see like a physical wave coming across the office. So yeah, people do that, and in spite of that, people can't quite make the adjustments to working from home. That I think there are actual opportunities. By the way, I've also been in a job on my last job in an IT company where you did get to work from home quite a lot, and I don't like that, actually. It feels like a perk when you first do it, and it feels like something that, but at the same time, when you're like spending a whole day, you can compensate for it if you're really good at using Skype or messaging software or whatever, and you're talking to people a lot. But in the end of the day, spending a whole day isolated from real people, and on more than that, actually, even staying never leaving the house and being almost in a room the whole day. It's great that you get to work during the commuting time, So, I've got an hour commute there and back, so that's 2 hours extra I can spend working, in the same amount of time. That's a huge benefit. But then when I look at my watch, my Withings Activité watch, at the end of the day, it tells me how many steps I did. It says I did like 50. You realize, oh crap, even just getting on the train, you walk a little bit, you are getting some air outside, you are, having something other than toast for lunch. It doesn't feel, and the fact that you're talking to other people. I must admit, I've done it, and I really don't like it very much. Well, it's good to have as an option, and good to do when you need it, like when my son is sick or whatever. It's good to have as an option, and I think at times like this, it's something people should responsibly do, and I've been, doing more than I otherwise would. But it's kind of, on the one hand, there are lots of downsides to it, but on the other hand, having people meaninglessly coming into work and getting everyone sick, like there's some culture things I think need to be reviewed in Japan. So yeah. Quentin Rankid, by the way, mentions that the mortality rate estimate is up a little bit, maybe greater than 3%. That's entirely possible because, of course, first thing is that in Japan, of course, the situation remains that although there are like 4,000 testing kits, only 900 people, there's only the administrative capacity to be able to process 900 requests per day, which means that the NHK was talking about the government. I mentioned this last week. They, even when doctors are convinced they have a pneumonia patient who's untreatable, who they think must have this, and they want to get them tested, the Japanese government is refusing to test them. So one, they're refusing to test them. Two, the cases that they're testing are limited and filtered, and really only the ones that are coming in that are so serious that develop into full-blown pneumonia. Well, you know what, that would have the opposite effect. If they're only looking at the most serious cases, that would imply a higher rate than is actually the case. But the other thing that people are talking about is that the mutation of the virus is making it have a higher fatality rate as well. At the end of the day, and this is the other thing as well, 2% doesn't seem, or 3% doesn't seem like a very big percentage, but of course when you're talking about something which at the moment looks like it's in an unrestrained way going across a whole population, it's kind of unimaginable in a country like 120 million people that everyone could get it. But, coming from New Zealand, of course with the 1918 Spanish flu, the Governor General, we just kicked the Germans out of Samoa, I believe, after World War I, so it was after 1919, and the New Zealand Governor of Western Samoa allowed people with the flu to land in Samoa, and on Samoa it killed like 20% of the population. This was an isolated case. This is New Zealand really absolutely was responsible for that. They didn't manage that at all. But the numbers are, honestly, even if it's 0.5%, given the rate of contagion of this, I mean, SARS had a higher death rate, but it was, it didn't spread as much. So yeah, it's something to be mindful of, the need to not panic or be stupid, but certainly to, think responsibly about. Andrew Mulboy, have a good night there. JZM, good to have you there in the comments. Yes, indeed, later indeed. So, whatever the rate is kind of immaterial. It's the high contagion rate and the seriousness of the emergency represented by the how widely spreading it is and the number of people it's affecting. And yeah, from that perspective, if that jogs some better thinking about ways of working, that's a good thing. So along with prohibiting all of these hanami parties and whatnot, the Japanese government also said that they are going to now quarantine travelers from China and South Korea. Ironically, China has actually done the same thing. That before Japan announced, China actually said themselves that they were going to quarantine people coming from Japan into China because they consider that they're getting it under control over there. You never really know with information. China is such a big country, of course, but indications are that the spread rate is decreasing. At least the numbers of people that each day are still increasing, but they're not. But the rate is decreasing. So they're worried about people who have gone outside, bringing the disease back into the country in an uncontrolled way. So they're asking visitors from South Korea and Japan to quarantine themselves they're going to quarantine people for 40 days when they come into China. So Japan decided to do the same thing, where they announced the other day that visitors, and this includes Japanese people, this is not a nationality thing, in fact this could be you or myself going to Korea at the wrong time and then trying to come back, as you will be forced to stay in a hotel for 14 days to check that you don't have anything before you'll be allowed into Japan, and they're instigating that. This drew fury from South Korea. Now South Korea has been subject to similar conditions of travel restrictions from like Italy, China, Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, a whole bunch of places. But when Japan did it, like Korea, as per usual, lost its mind over the whole thing, and then threatened retaliation, where it's now going to cut visa-free travel for Japanese people in Korea and do all sorts of other things to retaliate against Japan. I don't think there's much you can do about that. This is kind of a case of stuff that unfortunately happens a little bit too often. Somebody called into the office. Apparently they were in like Ibaraki or some prefecture like that, and Fukushima prefecture. They had a 37.8 degree fever and were feeling terribly sick, so they called in and said that please let me take the day off, I've got a fever and I'm not feeling well. The boss responded, well, you haven't been overseas and no one in Fukushima officially has coronavirus, so you should be fine to come into work, please come in. The person in question suggested that perhaps he should quit his job. That all. And you know what, Japan and America, America's actually worse on this stuff than Japan. Japan needs sick days. You need to be able to take days off when you're sick. Right now everything is set up to encourage people to come in and spread disease at work. So, Tech Art 2, the South Korea show that you mentioned, is now fully, and that looks like it's cut off. I'm sure you're meaning to say something else, and I don't know what South Korea show you mentioned. But yeah, we have Queen Daenerys Stormborn Tiger Yen. That looks like a Mongolian name. Welcome, Queen. Good morning to y'all. Morning, so you must be in America. Can't tell from time zones, but very curious what Tech Art 2 was referring to there. But yes, indeed. Anyway, so Japan still being Japan. This is how desperate I am to have topics other than COVID-19. I have been watching the US news. It is interesting to me how the Super Tuesday results went. Of course, Warren. Of course, superficially, Biden won. Like, what was it? All but two of the states that were up for grabs. But of course, because it's a delegate count. If you're going by the number of delegates, if you put Bernie Sanders and Warren together, they would have won most of the places that Biden won. So, it's not that Bernie really, they weren't all or nothing states, and Bernie still has got a huge number, especially from winning California. But of course, what happened in the wake of that was a lot of people seem to be falling in behind and saying, okay, now Biden, seems to have swung it around and it looks like he's going to be the candidate. So let's all get into line. And some supporters saying, oh, now that we're having a moderate candidate, the Democrats are going to lose. As a person, as a New Zealander living in Japan, who, frankly, America can decide whatever the hell it wants with its leaders, including Trump. They voted for him under the system that America has. So you're entitled to choose whoever you want. My objection to Trump is actually the same areas that I had discomfort with Obama when he was running, that he turned out to be totally not like at all, and the same issues that I have with Sanders. As someone living in Japan, I want people who will have open, free trade. I want American butter. I want cheap. I want jobs. I want technology. I want Teslas coming here. I want rockets. I want American butter. I want. And I actually recognize the important role that America plays in the stability of the world through its involvement. And to me, Americans are not obliged to trade with the entire world. They're a big country. They could put up walls around the whole country tomorrow and just give everybody jobs and do whatever the hell they wanted, and cut themselves off and leave us all to fend for ourselves. Perfectly entitled to do that. The idea that Americans are obliged, that they don't owe us anything, but the world is always a better place for America being deeply involved in it. And what I don't like about Sanders and what I don't like about Trump is that they are both isolationists. They are both nationalists to the extent that they want to put American workers first. And Obama used the same rhetoric. He sounded a lot like Sanders during the primaries. Everyone tries to appeal to like the hardcore of their party. The Democrats want to appeal liberal leftist, and the Republicans always want to appear more right wing when they're going through the nominee period, and then when they go into the election cycle, they try to become more centrist, and when they become leaders, they do what they're going to do. What's interesting to me about Trump is that he actually followed through. Acting like the loony right-wing maniac that he sounded like during the primary process, whereas what typically happens is more like what happened with Obama, that when they actually get the job, Obama went and signed up. He created the TPP, which of course Trump cancelled. He went and supported NAFTA. He went and supported initiatives that even though he pledged on getting Americans all out of Iraq and Afghanistan, he recognized the situation on the ground, didn't make that the right thing to do. And he stayed there even though he didn't like to do it. He didn't like to bail out the banks, but he recognized it was necessary to do. He was pragmatic, and that's kind of just what's important. You just want a leader who's going to be a good pragmatic leader. But at the same time, rhetoric-wise, on the left and on the right, they're the same. People want to make sure they're putting Americans first, and Americans are totally entitled to choose for Americans first. But for me, like when I'm watching what's remaining of the debates, here's the thing: I like Sanders a lot as a person. I'm sure he would actually be a fantastic leader, and I love his consistency. I actually like his Larry David sort of ish style to everything, and I would actually, on the one hand, I wouldn't mind at all if you guys chose him as president, but at the same time, I think he's like Trump. He's a populist, and he's actually very likely to follow through on what he says he's going to do, which Trump has done as well, by the way. I mean, he cut all those free trade deals right away. Mexico he screwed over, TPP he screwed over. We don't have American butter here, and I've been waiting for it. So Biden, the thing is, Biden's now in this awkward position. He's getting attacked over being pro-free trade, which from a pure Democrat perspective is selling American jobs overseas. But that's not how it works. Employment isn't zero sum. If the whole economy is doing well and everyone's getting richer, it's again, people can decide what they want to do, and of course nothing purely works, right? I mean, you've always got to offset the negative aspects of being too open sometimes, and if Americans want to correct, they're entitled to correct. However, for me, this is a good thing, the fact that you've got a guy from the administration that created the TPP, and he wants to come back and he wants to make sure that the shelves here always have unlimited supplies of cheap butter, even American butter. I'd actually be happy about that. So I don't know. I don't find Biden very exciting as a person or very interesting. But you know what? I think I'm just hoping Americans have gotten isolationism a little bit out of their system. And you know what? They might not have. This is the thing. We're looking right now. I'm not sure. Maybe America's never going to have a mainstream candidate from either party ever again because they don't trust the establishment. But for me, I could live with any of the choices, frankly. I'd even take Tulsi. I really would. When everyone's mourning how America can't have a woman president anymore, that Warren's pointing out, I pointed out to everybody, Tulsi is still in the race. I mean, that's a whole separate thing as well. The representation, the whole way that American politics works is really not geared towards proportional representation of society, right? Because it's basically based on winner takes all races for everything. You're going to get disproportionate white men, and these are problems which New Zealand and England and Australia, we all had originally electoral systems very much like America's, and we changed them because we recognized that problem. But you kind of are stuck with what you have. But look, like I say, I've had my confidence shaken, but I'm actually a big fan of America, and I really think the world needs America. We're better off for America being involved, and I really like to. I hope that Americans just make a really smart, sane choice, which I always believe that you'd do, although it hasn't always happened. And I'll take this guy. But when it comes to the things, the actual issues that matter to me as someone who's not an American and is outside and is looking as a non-American who wants to benefit from Americans, Biden is great for that, and Bernie, I don't think he's doing the wrong thing for Americans at all. In fact, I think Americans are perfectly entitled to say that, we want to make sure every American has a job in a shoe factory before we allow any shoes to be made outside of America. If they want to do that, fine, if you really want to make shoes. But, for me, I think it's a good choice anyway, so we'll see. To me, the Democratic primary battle now that it comes down to those two, it's really between isolationism and engagement. And the thing is, what really annoys me is people don't advocate in any country, not in New Zealand, not in Australia, not in England. It's really easy to say we should shut the gates, right? This is what Brexit is all about. This is what's happening in every country. Everybody's saying we should isolate ourselves. Coronavirus is a fantastic tool to use for people who say that the outside is dangerous and I will be the protector who will defend us all by cutting us all off. It's really hard to be the person who's advocating for we should it's actually in our interest to actually be engaged more with people and accept that there'll be good and bad, but on the whole it will be better if we actually progress. That sounds dangerous. And people don't like it. And what really frustrates me about moderates, like people from Biden's administration, is that it's not that they go and do all these free trade deals, it's that they don't actually explain them enough, and they don't actually passionately commit to them the same way the isolationists commit to their positions. And I find the isolationist positions myself to be very persuasive, but I just think that they're wrong. That's me anyway. So Te Waiwai, good to have you along there. We'll see what will happen. Bye, McNeil, Trump re-elected. Yeah, well, actually, I could totally see that happening. Bye, you there in the comments, are you? Missed you there. America's screwed. Trump is going to get re-elected. I kind of see that. Well, look, if you're going to have any chance, this is your hope. As far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I can see Trump getting re-elected. I can still see a lot of the crowd. By the way, by McNeil, I like the, I think it was Saturday Night Live, but with Dave Chappelle, talking about election night. The most shameful thing America has ever done. Yes, so I thought that was funny, and that's just actually probably exactly, it's probably still true. All the conditions of that, it was brilliant, yes. And I think the conditions behind that were all still true. But we'll see. Surprise me, America, please. Hiko 2024. For what country? I'm not allowed to vote in New Zealand or in Japan. I can't vote anywhere. I'm like a North Korean refugee. But yeah, why not vote for me, right? Yes. So we're talking about furniture. I talked about furniture. It wasn't even a fib because YouTube is now demonetizing videos because it's too sensitive. I guess toilet paper is coming under that topic as well now, so there you go. That's the thing that's happening. This was actually quite a good article. I couldn't help but laugh at the title, and to see it was actually written by a Japanese person. Every day is International Men's Day in Japan. Of course, it was International Women's Day this week. And I remember asking my kids, asking my parents, when I first learned that Japan has a Children's Day, and they have both a Mother's Day and a Father's Day and a Children's Day. And I remember learning this at school in New Zealand, and I ran home and said, in Japan, they have a day for children, not just for mums and dads, but they also have a day for children. Isn't that wonderful? And my mum said, without a moment, without skipping a beat of hesitation, she said, but Hiko, every day is Children's Day. Wow, I was like, did she know this was coming? She's shot back, and I had no response, and that's exactly what Nobuko is saying there, and it's true. I mean, how you look at all of these meetings of important people making incorrect decisions about running the country right now in Japan. They are rooms of men in suits, one or two women there, but there you go. And actually I saw a bunch of things this week showing how like representation, not just in politics but in companies, over the last 2 or 3 years, how in Southeast Asian countries, with the exception of Singapore, have all actually gone up. In Thailand, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, companies have actually made a real effort to try to increase board representation and representation and leadership of women. They've actually gotten the numbers to go from 10% to 20, 25, 30. Singapore has actually gone down a little bit from 20 to 18, but Japan is 10%. In fact, even lower than South Korea. So absolutely true. And what can you do? I mean, everyone's got problems, but Japan as well. And it's kind of funny as well with the representation thing, how I talked about how the US system kind of fosters underrepresentation of women, but the Japanese system doesn't. You have party lists. There are parties in Japan that actually have party lists where you vote for a party. They'll actually make sure that half the representatives or more are women in Japan. So it really is the LDP. I mean, part of the problem being a lot of women don't want to join the LDP. Abe did try to accelerate, actually. He tried to take very junior politicians who were women and put them up into the cabinet early. Yeah, that didn't always work out very well when you put inexperienced people into roles that they're not really ready for, particularly when they are the heirs of corrupt political dynasties. My favorite was it Keiko Obuchi? I actually thought they were going to put her in the ministry, in charge of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, and she seemed like smart and articulate. And I thought, wow, she's actually the daughter of our ex-prime minister, but she's doing really well. But it turned out that her fundraising for her electoral stuff was all quite corrupt, and she was getting a lot of kickbacks. And when investigators came to come and check her books, apparently her staff were well enough trained that they all got power drills, and they drilled holes all through the. They called her Power Drill after this as her nickname, just after she was forced to resign. She power drilled all the hard disks and computers that her office was using. So you can tell that she was well trained, but just not quite in the right way. But they're still trying, but that is still definitely a true thing. That is a picture of the Korean foreign minister losing her shit at Japan for putting a quarantine on them when like 20 other countries have put travel restrictions on South Korea. But when Japan does it, they're saying it's political. And hell, it probably is at this point. There's nothing much you can really do. But that was kind of funny. Yes, at this point so it's kind of funny. YouTube says talk about the news, be topical, be informative, just don't talk about the too soon, I guess is what they're saying about this. It's again, I get it's hard to draw a line between responsible and irresponsible content on furniture, like what we're talking about, but I don't know, YouTube is going around demonetizing it, so fine, we'll just talk about, I don't know, this is a thing, I'm desperate for anything else to talk about, so yeah, she looks pretty pissed, doesn't she? And they were enraged, actually, like looking at the reaction. And by the way, the Japanese internet was like, thank you for threatening to cut us off, because, and this is the thing, Korea's been boycotting Japan for like a year, for like 10 other reasons anyway, so yeah. But yeah, the thing, but South Korea, they've got, women cabinet ministers. They're at least doing well on the equality thing. And being pissed at Japan is an important function of being in charge in Korea. So, I'd say she's doing a perfect job by at least the standards that I can see over there. But anyway, this was a thing that happened. Speaking of men ruining the world, a 50-year-old man in Aichi Prefecture, so that's where Nagoya is, although if it was Nagoya, they would have said Nagoya, so I think it wasn't actually in Nagoya. But yeah, he got diagnosed with new coronavirus, COVID-19, and was told to Gamagori City. Sounds like Gomorrah, doesn't it? Well, I guess it is now, because what he did was, when they told him he had coronavirus and he was obviously not sick enough to check him into hospital, they said, but he was positive, so go home and please just stay at home. He decided, well, I'm going to go all over town bar hopping, drinking, and he told people in every bar that he went to that yes, he was let me tell you what happened to me. He went bragging that he had COVID-19 in every bar that he went to all over the city, this alarming people all over the city that this person was basically going around all the bars. So on the one hand, it's kind of, I do think it is a good thing, that when you live in a free society, unfortunately you have to tolerate that there's going to be a certain amount of idiocy and stupid people that you're just going to have to live with, and I would rather live in a society where this sort of thing happened than lived in a society like China, where someone like that would be arrested and probably disappear, or publicly, actually. They actually talked about when in China, when people like threatening or being violent towards medical staff, like during this thing, they actually put in a public announcement that they will be applying the death penalty to people who are violent towards hospital staff. China doesn't mess around, but they can pretty much go with their heart, whatever they feel like, they can do whatever the hell they want. And you're pretty sure that's what would happen to someone like this if they were in the People's Republic of China. But yes, I guess the reason that countries do that is because there's always going to be some idiot like this who does that. Speaking of idiots, by the way, I wonder if it's the next story. It'd be funny if it was. It's not quite the next one. It is a few ones away. This one. A 70-year-old man in Yokohama He had a fever for 5 days. He wasn't diagnosed at the time, but still, he was 70 years old, he had a fever. He still thought he'd go to the gym and work out and bathe and sweat all over everything. And basically, people who have assessed the situation now have assessed that he, over the 5 days in a row that he went to a gym with a coronavirus fever, deeply exposed. So you had close contact with 1,406 other people who attended that gym. Who now, apart from the fact they've had to close down the gym and they're trying to decontaminate the whole thing, they've contacted all 1,406 people who attended the gym while the 70-year-old was there, and they've suggested they all need to get tested now as having had close contact with the disease. So I'll tell you what, they're taking us down with them anyway. So I don't know. I still think it's better to be here than in China, but sometimes, in moments of weakness, you can see how maybe China was right. What can you say? In Yokohama, I'm missing working out. So my gym is like a small gym. There aren't many people there, but of course I brag about how much I sweat every time I go there. I weigh myself before and after, and on an average session I sweat 1 kilo, or 1 liter of sweat. And if I do sparring, I'll sweat like 2 kilos. So it's like, I would say that's a no-course issue. That's definitely, I'm definitely spreading more than I'm probably receiving. But yes, out of the whole situation, I've stopped going to my kickboxing gym. I mean, that in itself is kind of unhealthy, not exercising. But again, it's just kind of like, I want this thing to be over so I can go back to going to the gym 3 times a week. So I'm waiting for it, but yes, to actually keep going when you're sick, like in the current situation, is just like not very good. This is kind of interesting. There was a TV show on TV Asahi that they had a news show talking about the mask shortage in Japan, and talking about how the government had secured extra supplies, but those extra supplies would be prioritized for government workers and not for hospitals and medical institutions. In response to this sort of news broadcast on TV Asahi, the Ministry of Health, Labour, Welfare put out a tweet where they said, "We've been public and we've explained this to everybody in Parliament that the supply, the stock of masks that we are keeping is going to be prioritized for use in hospitals, not just for ourselves. And you need to stop spreading misinformation like this that could panic people. So TV, broadcasters and media need to be responsible with their information follow-ups." So Asahi actually followed up with the Ministry of Health, because they looked for, where did they say this in Parliament? Like, where did they actually confirm this? Because they had information from bureaucrats that said that this was going to be prioritized for bureaucrats, and that these masks were not going to go to medical institutions and hospitals as a priority. And they were accused of being liars and spreading fake news by the official Ministry of Health Twitter account. So they went to go and check, hey, did we make a mistake? And they couldn't find anything. So they followed up and they contacted the Ministry of Health, and they said, are you sure? And they said, actually we checked. No, we didn't say this in Parliament. And it would also be saying too much that we are prioritizing medical institutions. That'll of course happen, but first we're going to keep them for ourselves. So basically the Ministry of Health was there was this kind of thing where they were accusing one of the main broadcasters in Japan of lying and spreading false information, and actually berating them for being irresponsible, when it turned out the government itself, who was only doing this through Twitter, was itself lying and admitted to lying after they had berated this media company for doing that. So pretty bad. So yes, Sergeant Bilko should be safe going to the gym. They'll be empty because of the virus not to be met. Well, the problem is that the whole point of going when you're kickboxing, well, you can do it by yourself, but it's always more fun when you do it with someone else, isn't it? So I don't know. I will wait until such a time as it's ready to go. This is something somebody posted this. Caffeine Jedi posted this on Facebook, and I tried it, and it's actually really good. So to make sure that you're actually washing your hands for 20 seconds, because I am not a 20-second washing my hands with soap person. I'm not like that. So I need to make sure I do it. And what I heard, there are many different things. People are saying sing happy birthday twice, but I've actually found the chorus of Never Gonna Give You Up. It's 20 seconds long, and if you just do the whole Rick Astley while you're washing your hands, you get 20 seconds. So I've been actually using that, and it's actually been quite effective, and it's been so effective. I actually tweeted about it, and the moment that I tweeted about it, people tweeted back that yes, announcement, Rick Astley tour cancellation. and people said it was my fault. And look, I don't know. I've known Rick Astley for a long time, and I guess I've just been too shy to say it. But listen, Rick Astley, he had a tour concert planned in Japan that he's cancelled. I mean, he definitely gave us up. He let us all down. He ran around and he just deserted us here. He said he was going to have the concerts, and it turned out it was a lie. He just said goodbye and deserted us. So Rick Astley, I don't know. I'm not sure I can continue in good conscience washing my hands with your song. I'd love to learn that Vietnamese pop song that they're using. That actually sounds really cool. Except Vietnamese is 16 tones. I'm sure I could never sing it correctly. I do. Never Gonna Give You Up is still a great song, but apparently the moment I tweeted that, people immediately started blaming me for this. But what could I say? I feel like he's definitely let us down and given up on us. So yes, to Wai. Sorry, I did it to you, but believe me, use it for the hand washing. The germs go away. That's the thing that happened. I have been enjoying. I watched 2 episodes of Non-Native Creative. If you're not, go subscribe to it. Go like them. Go leave comments. Again, and actually, bravely, it looks like Alicia in Tokyo. Alicia, she flew over to Korea to record the latest one with a singer in Korea, but this one's an Egyptian guy in Japan who writes cartoons, which are also shown. He's actually a doctor, a dentist. So there we go, dentist there. But he also does cartoons, which are shown in the Metropolis magazine. So yes, super interesting story, actually. Kind of not the sort of background that I've heard very many examples of in Japan. They're all really, really cool stories. She's doing a really good job with the series. They're worth watching, and it's definitely a channel worth supporting. So go and do that. Dogin, god damn you, Dogin. You all know who Dogin is. I don't even need to tell you, because Dogin is 1,000,000 times more famous than me. What pisses me off about Dogin is that, people spend 20 years on YouTube and blogging and social media to achieve kind of a quick, pithy once, a clever video or a clever sort of thing that goes viral once, that he just does 2 or 3 times a week. He just does it effortlessly. He just comes up with advice, the surest way to avoid making mistakes in Japanese is to never open your mouth. I mean, sage advice, and he is consistently funny, consistently insightful, and god damn, he's just so good at everything. And it's just please let us mediocre people have a chance sometime, Dogin. So yes, Dogin is awesome. This apparently is true. This was first getting tweeted in Japanese. I was following this in Japanese, and it got picked up, and I was kind of true. But apparently what's happening, where in Japan people are rushing for masks, and in Australia they're rushing for toilet paper, in America, when shit hits the fan, they clean out the supermarkets of bullets, specifically 5.56mm bullets, apparently the most popular. To which immediately people on Twitter started lecturing me about ammunition types, which is exactly how stupid the whole thing is. I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work. If they're going to be shooting the germs, or they're just going to be people who run away have the virus, and people who don't run away are asymptomatic. They shoot everybody. I don't exactly know how this works. To why I also did see the 223 debate. And by the way, I grew up in a house with rifles. We had a 303 and a 22, and I used to go out and Dad took me out hunting and shooting cans and stuff like that. So I'm not from a military. I wasn't from a gun-free environment at all. But I do find the idea that when COVID-19 is going around in America, that they're emptying out of ammunition, to be kind of ridiculous. But it does remind me, I guess, that Japan runs out of face masks, Australia runs out of toilet paper. I guess that would be the third one. The Americans run out of ammo, the Aussies run out of toilet paper. You can put it around that way. It's very much like the Napoleon joke. You've heard the Napoleon joke. I'll tell you if you haven't. But I heard it told different ways. But Waterloo, the French versus the British, sort of Napoleon standing, and the British have broken through our lines, so what are we going to do? Napoleon said, bring me my telescope that my men may not see the fear in my eyes. Sir, we're within bullet range, they're shooting at us, people are starting to get hit. And he's, okay, bring me my red jacket that I may be shot, that my men may not see me bleed. A few minutes later, his men come up and report, sir, the British have broken through, they're slaughtering everybody, they've entered the building, what do we do? He says, bring me my brown trousers. I guess there's kind of a variation on that somewhere, with Japanese going for masks, Americans going for ammo, and Australians going for toilet paper. I don't understand what's happening to the world right now, but I don't know. I don't. Aaron, hey, look, Bernie Sanders' pro-gun. Vermont's a pro-gun state. Yeah, that's a state. I mean, he's not a Democrat either. Technically, he's not a registered Democrat. He's running for the nomination. I mean, but he's pro-gun. And to me, guns themselves are not. There's nothing wrong with it per se. It's just the kind of the worship of guns in America is just it's weird, right? Like I say, I grew up around guns, but I still think that is some weird shit. I could think that, right? So that's a thing. That's the 70-year-old who in close contact with 1,406 people in a gym in Yokohama. So yes, very good that you're not going to the gym in Yokohama. Some good news from Fukushima, apart from the fact that they're doing all sorts of really cool stuff in Fukushima. Of course, the population of the area particularly, Fukushima's like Texas in Japan. It was the bread basket, literally. It was the huge agricultural food producing part of Japan. And and the vast majority of Fukushima actually wasn't that affected by the nuclear plant, but of course the area there is a big evacuation area around the plant, which has been pretty much depopulated, and although people can now move back, there's been a long decontamination process there. People have been away from for so long that they've kind of established lives now in other parts of Japan where they've moved to, and the government's been thinking for a long time about how to reinvigorate this area. And what they're doing is that if you're particularly like an IT company or a high-tech company or whatever, and you want to put a data center up there, or you want to put a renewable energy thing up there or whatever, the government's pretty much making it for free. And of course TEPCO's got a bunch of nuclear and other power plants up there as well, so you've got great infrastructure. It's close to Tokyo, it's cheap, the government will pay you to do anything up there pretty much. And a lot of companies have done this. They've put up solar farms, they've put up data IT development areas, all this sort of stuff, which is good for the prefecture, of course, good for the recovery. And this is super cool. They're actually created one of the world's biggest hydrogen plants. Remember the significance of hydrogen. Right now, of course, Teslas are all running on this idea of lithium-ion batteries. They're big, heavy batteries that can store a lot of electricity, but they take up to an hour to recharge. 15 minutes to recharge something like, 60% or something like that, but an hour to recharge fully. So there's always a limitation on electric vehicles, that you've got this problem that if they run on batteries, they have to recharge them, and the fact that the batteries themselves don't last forever, and they're kind of messy and they're full of nasty chemicals. The solution that I always saw when I was doing renewable energy stuff, before all of this, was actually fuel cells, which are the same electric motors, but instead of running off a battery, they run off a fuel-based cell, which you basically fill just like, in a similar way to how you'd fill a car with gasoline, except instead of combusting that fuel, it would be actually creating, you put hydrogen fuel into a car, which would have an output of steam, of literally water and oxygen as the exhaust gas. And the car would be electrically powered, but you could one, get longer range than an electric car, and two, you could just fill up in the same time it takes to fill up a car at a gas station. The reason that the battery cars have done so much better as electric power is because you can plug in your cars at home. There are no hydrogen petrol stations anywhere right now. So it's basically, although fuel cells and hydrogen-based fuel cells, hydrogen the most abundant element in the universe. Although it's a better solution, there just isn't the infrastructure for it, and that's the problem. There needs to be a critical mass of infrastructure so that you can actually drive around and not fear running out of gas or running out of hydrogen. The question about how safe it is, I think it was, the technology has obviously come along a lot from the Hindenburg from those times. From what I understand, again, the questions about how to have safe hydrogen infrastructure have been looked at for a long time, and I believe that they've figured out ways to make it inert. You actually mix it when you store it, so basically you can make it, I believe you can render it inflammable when you're storing it and transporting it. So again, there are those issues, but in terms of a long-term solution to having more electric cars on the road, and this is actually what Toyota and Honda and Japanese car makers, they looked at batteries, and they although they did hybrid cars, they recognized the problem with hybrid. The reason they went for hybrid and not fully electric was the range problem. And for full electric, what Toyota's been investing in is fuel cells. And so the idea that, I think it's actually wonderful that Japan's creating a huge hydrogen producing plant in Fukushima, which hopefully can be a step towards. It'll take more time. It's not something that's ready to go right now, but if we could get these petrol stations everywhere to be offering hydrogen as well as petrol, it could be a way that we could actually get much more cars going over into emission-free cars, which would be awesome. So that would be a good thing. I thought that was good news. This is also kind of good news. In Yokohama, there have actually been again, in wake of the COVID-19, like everywhere, people, again, it doesn't take very much for people to become fearful and hateful towards each other, and for prejudice to come out, and it's definitely come out in Japan. It's not just Japanese people and Asians being victims in America and Europe. I mean, it's crazy that Asian-looking people are becoming discriminated pretty nastily in places like Italy and Germany and stuff like that. Lots of cases of Japanese getting called out and being accused of having coronavirus just for looking Asian, when those countries now actually have it much worse, or Italy has it much worse than Japan has it. I mean, people should be more afraid of other Italians than of Asian-looking tourists that don't have it. But from the same irrational racist prejudice that unfortunately is always pretty close to the surface of humanity. In Yokohama, apparently in the Chinatown in Yokohama, many of the districts there received a kind of hate letter from a lot of people saying, hey, Chinese people go home, or something like that. This got some publicity, and apparently the result of that publicity was that a lot of the places that were targeted, which happen to be very popular Chinese restaurants, actually have now huge queues outside them of people showing up to show solidarity with the owners, who often have lived in Japan for more than the Chinatowns, particularly the one in Yokohama. These people have been in Japan for like 150 years. They're very well established parts of the community. And again, it just shows, it's always the really most stupid people that go into this first. There again, of course, people just coughing and getting harassed and bullied and sent home and treated like germs themselves is happening. They're calling it corona harassment, korohara. That is a thing that's happening in Japan. We're coming up on time. This is the final thing. Second final thing. I'll do this one first. I actually saw a tweet last week, or a story that was the head of Suntory, the beverage company, but also famous, of course, for the whiskeys, talking about this. It's a real big economic problem for Japan, literally phrasing that there is a non-alcohol problem of young people not drinking alcohol nowadays. That's adversely affecting the economy. And what a time to be alive, that we consider people not getting drunk enough and not drinking enough as being a problem. So it's good to see Nikkei covering a story talking about how people are actually looking at the preference of many young people to have healthier lifestyles and not drink so much alcohol, and to embrace that as a way to have parties at places that actually specialize in menus of drinks that are aimed at people that don't want to drink alcohol. And where people don't feel pressured to drink alcohol. There's talk of that being a $3 billion economy and sobernomics. I like the idea, actually. And this is the thing. I drink, but I don't enjoy getting smashed. I don't like getting headaches or hungover or whatever. And I'm actually quite comfortable going out. I don't drink at home. I seldom drink when I'm out. I'll drink with people to be social, but I actually like to be in a place that where you actually have a good choice of drinks and you're not being forced to just drink some horrible, beer or whatever. So, I think that's a good idea. That's a good thing. Final thing, tomorrow is the 75th anniversary of the firebombing of Tokyo. Now, here's the thing, of course, I didn't realize that myself, that it was coming up. I think I've talked about the firebombings of Tokyo before. If you watch this show, you should probably know what they are. But essentially, in a single night in March 9, 1945, so remember that the war didn't end until August 15. The A bombings were in August, so that was still like 5-6 months before that, which actually points out that Japan actually went for a long time after this happened. But essentially what happened, I tweeted, I called it Operation Meeting House. I call it Westinghouse for some reason, which was stupid. But apparently this was basically where the Americans, when they first tried bombing Japan, they first engaged in strategic bombing, where they tried to fly low so that they could try to accurately drop bombs on particular targets. However, what they were finding was two problems. One, Tokyo has this crazy jet stream which comes off the mountains over the top. It makes it kind of hard to fly at low altitude. And of course, flying at lower altitude, you can get shot down more easily. So the Americans, who found they were losing planes, they were not still easily hitting their targets because of the unstable air over Japan. They decided, you know what, screw it. Why don't we just go to high altitude and just try to wipe out as much of the sea as possible? And apparently at this point in the war, by the way, this happened like a month before or after Dresden. And it was very much the same thing. These were basically a lot of airplanes that flew at range above where Japanese could shoot them down. They dropped incendiary bombs. To be specific, there's actually a really good description here in this Time article, which doesn't so much discuss what actually happened in the bombing and the consequences of it. In fact, and Time, of course, existed at the time and covered the Tokyo firebombing at the time, but it talks about how these this bomb that they were dropping, the M69, that was developed, which was used for the first time, they used amiable clusters of 38 oil bombs that were developed with the help of the oil company Esso, which used to be like Texaco or whatever. So a private oil company helped them to figure out how to develop a jelly, basically also napalm. So that's it. They developed, this was the first ever use of napalm bombs that were dropped from a huge height in clusters of 38 all over Tokyo, from Ueno all the way out to Koiwa. So that's a very, very big part of Tokyo. It was basically, and the entire thing was basically set on fire with napalm jelly that was dropped from a high altitude with a time delayed diffuse that would set these things like basically clingy, fiery pancakes, each spreading to more than a yard in diameter. On its own, it could be extinguished as easily, and I say easily, as a magnesium bomb. It's not easy to put out. But a single oil bomb cluster produces so many fiery pancakes that the problem for firefighters, like that of a mother whose child got loose in a jam pot, is where to begin. So Time magazine describes pouring napalm over half of Tokyo is like a kid playing in a jam pot. And it was wonderfully successful because people wouldn't know where to start putting out these napalm fires. These napalm fires that were basically covered half of Tokyo. They killed 100,000 people in one night. They destroyed, up until that time, the most destructive area bombing in history had been actually of London by the Germans, and it had been like 1 acre. This was like 50 times that area in one night, and it killed 100,000 people. And it's kind of funny because I've seen documentaries about Churchill, who was himself so disturbed by what happened in Dresden, where they did the same thing, that he actually left the air bombers out of a lot of commemorations. He wouldn't mention them, he wouldn't commemorate statues, so it took them a long time, even though they had some of the highest rates of losses of personnel doing the bombing raids over Germany and whatnot. The people were so disturbed when they realized what they had been doing, that they had been actually hitting a lot of civilians. In the US, I've heard people describe it was like a bar fight. It was like total war, and at this point, the Japanese had done lots of terrible things, and the Americans were trying to do whatever they could to accelerate the end of the war, and they just had to make the consequences of staying so horrible and all these kind of rationalizations for it. But essentially, what happened in Tokyo tomorrow, 75 years ago, so actually not that long ago, was in a single night. It was the largest mass murder of people to ever happen in a single night, including the atomic bombings. And neither of the atomic bombings over time, through radiation poisoning and whatnot, of course, Hiroshima, they reckon got up to 140,000. But in a single night's damage, both in terms of property damage and loss of life. And again, it was rationalized. I know at the time that these were all sort of Borg-like, same-ish, fanatical, emperor-worshipping, militaristic fanatics, and you could somehow treat them the same. And this is why Japanese got put into internment camps in America, but not, they didn't round up all Italian Americans of third or fourth generation, but they would for Asians who looked different. It was Japanese were obviously dehumanized to the point that you could quite easily rationalize, and you could find the jelly pancakes that they were dropping all over Tokyo and setting on fire. More interesting than the fact that 100,000 people were killed in one night. And this is interesting, really, because if it sounds like I'm making a big deal out of it, I'm not making a big deal to play up the idea that Japan's a victim or anything like that per se. I mean, it's a terrible thing, but it's the fact that even in Japan, there wasn't a single museum, and there were no commemorations for this. And even in the late 1990s, when the government first, actually in the late 1990s, like 46 years after the war, I think. So what was that, 1991? When they first put up a first museum, I was watching a special on this tonight. It was immediately closed after it was opened because people were afraid that playing up the idea Japan was a victim would be seen as being revisionist or right-wing. So they actually closed it and they reopened it, including exhibits about Pearl Harbor, so that Americans wouldn't feel like they were trying to, demonize America over the whole thing. They also put in government pro-war propaganda to show that the war was popular at the time. Because this is domestically also the problem as well. Hiroshima and Nagasaki they saw themselves as victims of Tokyo as much or even more than they saw themselves as victims of America from the A bombings. The war was part of the result of this sort of out of control, highly centralized fascist government in Japan that decided it would be a good idea to pick a war with Japan. Whereas Tokyo, when it got bombed itself, nobody really felt particularly sorry for Tokyo, and Tokyo never felt for a long time after the war like it could commemorate this. But the fact of what happened is, for whatever excuse, there was a fact that you imagine today, everybody from Ueno to Koiwa, Kinshicho, the whole Suminagawa, the whole area where the Sky Tree is, that whole area, every single building disappearing, and people, basically being set on fire with petroleum, with gasoline jelly napalm being poured all over them and set on fire. This is what happened. And it's kind of amazing that people don't know about it. Again, the first rule of war is don't lose. It would be really interesting to see how you would have defended this if you were on the side that was being held accountable for conduct during the war afterwards. It was a terrible thing. The lesson that universally is taken from Japanese is that wars suck and don't do them, and it's actually don't take peace for granted. But Tomei Samurai, I'm sorry you lost on the Kansai thing, but to actually see a map of the area that was affected, my father-in-law was alive at the time. He was actually in Itabashi, and apparently he was in a little hamlet of houses that the whole area around was burned down, and these houses were the only houses that were left standing, and he was in them. But kind of just unimaginable. I mean, half the city, and it is one of the biggest cities in the world. I mean, it's 38 million people for the greater area. I saw in some documentary the other day. It's a huge area. So, yeah. Christopher Luke, you don't remember why did Japan switch sides after World War I? That's a very long story, which actually I talked about the other week with the 226. There were various factors that caused Japan to start to feel sorry for Germany. Part of it, certainly, Japan felt it wasn't treated the same as other. Two things that happened after World War I. One, there was the foundation of the League of Nations, where Japan wanted the foundation for there to be included in the Charter a racial equality provision. Because they basically, there were two things. One was the racial equality provision dispute at the League of Nations. The other was the Versailles Treaty, where they handed out the colonies of the defeated countries, particularly Germany, and Japan, as an ally, expected to get a share of the German colonies in China, and it didn't. It got sort of second-class treatment, and when it was when it started to feel like it wasn't being treated the same as the Western nations, at Versailles, in the League of Nations, when they put in a clause demanding racial equality for all peoples in the world, in the Charter of the League of Nations, South Africa and Australia vehemently objected to that, and they had the United Kingdom object to that, and so Japan immediately felt like the Germans that they had been sort of hard done by from the outcome of World War I, particularly given that they had been on the Allies side. Then, of course, there was the military coup, the February 26th incident. which also will mark the pivot point where the military really started to take over. And when I say the military, the young Turks, the young impoverished officers from rural parts of Japan who felt like they were being sort of passed over by the central government, the depression. There were a bunch of factors that caused Japan to become adventurous and to feel like it was not being treated equally or fairly, and it arguably wasn't. There were a number of things that pivoted it to go the other way, but of course the end result was this, and none of that justifies what happened. But it's an interesting day in history that affects the city that I live in, and that, you know, that's what you come here for. So that's the thing that happened. Time is up, Mr. Cordy Chip, I did a video on the 38 million population thing. There was a video I saw the other day on explaining like different cities and the geography and sort of culture of different cities and how Tokyo got to be. They said 38. I always think of the number as 25. I guess it's how you cut it, right? If you're probably taking the whole Shutoken for that, but yeah. Anyway, so yes. Anyway, we are over time. I actually got through this. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, but good to see you all. Hopefully there will be more stories about furniture next week. I don't care if this is demonetized or not, but it would be stupid if it was. Obviously, I'm very happy to share with you guys the news every week. Remember, if you like this show, hit the like button. Always great to see you all. Thank you for the comments and the stuff over there. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter if you want to keep up with the stuff during the week, where I'm always happy to have a chat. And see you all next week, same time, same channel. Boom. Peace. Just caught the end, John Anderson. Good to see you, John Anderson. Hey, just made it. You can watch. I'll stop it now, and then the recording will show up. And definitely leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. Oh, Milchman 2. Also good to see you and everybody else. Next week, the Great Shelf Belly from IKEA, which in Japan is called IKEA, which is actually the correct pronunciation, is it not? Sergeant Bilko Barringer. Also good to see you. And hi, bye, Christopher Luke, John Anderson, everybody. See you all. Good evening.